It would have been December, I believe, in 1995. Just a small number of weeks after the Million Man March, which is relevant to this story, that I met a young lawyer from Chicago. It was quite a fortuitous meeting. At the beginning, I did not know its significance, which has only become obvious later. And in that meeting, I learned the many things, because he, for a number of hours, completely opened himself up in a way that he rarely does, and spoke quite openly about his life, his feelings, his emotions, his recent history, his life history, and his new-made friends in high places, new friends such as Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton. So the story is relevant because people make a timeline, and they take the timeline back maybe 20 years from now, when really they should take it back nearly 25, because there's a piece that's missing in the timeline. Now I'm leaving something out, you might say, because there'll be nothing in here about Bill Ayers. Had I known that he was a neighbor of Bill Ayers and a friend, I would have asked, because we ran in the same circles, Bill and I, back in the day. But I would have asked about Kathy. How's she doing? But I did not know that. I didn't know the man at all. What I did know is that when I first met him, and I've met very many incredible people in my life, more than any person should expect to meet. I mean, unless one was born in a high place, which I was not. But I've met many incredible people, many very charismatic people. None even close to as charismatic. Even Muammar Gaddafi. Yes, that's another story for another video. Even Muammar Gaddafi, charismatic as he was not a match in charisma for this young lawyer, who walked in the room. When he stood in the doorway, first saw him, something deep inside reaches out and says, "I want to be this man's friend." Some have said it is magic. Some have said it is black magic. I don't know. I just know I've never met a man with so much charisma, so much you just want to be his friend. You want him to be your friend when you meet him. It does not project nearly so much when you're not in person with him. But there he was, and he was troubled. It became obvious he was troubled. He was in an awkward situation. Was it an accidental awkward situation? Perhaps. Or had someone set him up as a test in a very awkward situation? To have someone report back, how did he do? Could he handle it? I don't know. I do not know, but that is a possibility. But I just know that he walked up to the blackboard by himself, and he wrote a name on the blackboard, and he repeated the name to himself several times, quietly, in a whisper. I had gotten there early at Howard University, so I was witness to this part that others were not. Whispered the name to himself, as if he had recently changed his name or was operating under an alias and had to remember what name he was using today. He had a curious ring on his finger. I know enough of the world to immediately have recognized that it appeared to be Arabic writing, superimposed on Arabic writing, superimposed on Arabic writing. Quite curious. And I did get close enough. I shook that hand at one point, or the other hand. I don't remember which hand he wore it on. I think he wore it on the other hand, but you know, this kind of a handshake. The other hand is there. I made a point of getting a close look. But that was later that I shook his hand, after the talk. So, the thing that I thought was curious was that he wrote this name, and my first thought, honestly, I mean, I've been around a long time and seen a lot of things, and many people have changed their name to what some people call a ghetto name. Okay? And some of them are genuine African names, and some of them are pretend, I think it sounds like African name, and that's what I thought he was doing. I honestly did. And then I thought, that's kind of silly because he picked a name that's Jewish, and then I realized, no, the Jewish name is spelled slightly different. And then I realized, well, if it's that close to Hebrew, but not Hebrew, it must be an Arabic name, and in fact it is. So, people filed in, and the meeting, though, didn't start. It was delayed. And in order to understand the whole rest of the story, I have to go back. I have to bring several threads together, without which the context isn't there. So, the context. Well, the reason I was there, I was between marriages, one could say. One could say that I simply had a wife that wouldn't live with me. But for whatever, my dream of having many children was in abeyance. I found that there was an opportunity, if pursued with diligence, within the next few years, before I got too old, to do a single-parent adoption. A single-parent adoption of some infant. And I thought that was out of reach, and I was pursuing it. And the reason I was able to pursue it was there was an organization, which I appreciated very much, which some people had put together in Montgomery County, Maryland. I was living in Carroll County, Maryland, 2 counties over. And they had put together an organization because of the difficulties. The whole adoption industry, and it is an industry, was wrapped up in agencies and law firms that make a lot of money. And they keep trying to make the regulations tighter. They say it's to protect the children, but really it's to keep the costs that you have to incur to these firms higher, and then they can live high on the hog and buy their Cadillacs and Corvettes and so on the money of families that just want to provide a home for children. But that's another story. But some people said, hey, this is a scam, and they put together an organization, kind of a co-op for helping each other do the adoption paperwork and hiring the social worker that was needed to get the family studies done, the home studies done. The organization was, and probably still is, called Adoptions Together. Their headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland, and they had a branch office in Pikesville, Maryland, which was quite close to where I lived. And I contacted them and laid out my $1,100 and began to go through the process. And they had formed a kind of a sister organization to help them and to help other things, because the children that were available for adoption were children that were taken away by social services in Maryland and DC and in Virginia from families that were very poor, single parents that were very poor, not about poverty, but about drug addiction and crime. Okay, won't address the issue in this video, but that was what was happening. And just a few months before this, maybe a year before, it wasn't very long, President Bill Clinton had very courageously signed the Adoption Reform Act. This really is relevant to why what happened on that day at Howard University when I met that young lawyer from Chicago, which is a very important meeting. I'm not diverging off of that. But to understand that meeting, you must understand the context. So bear with me, please. Bill Clinton had signed this law against tremendous opposition, not from the Republicans, who were in favor of the law, but from his own party. Not all of his own party, but many. The social work industry. And one particular organization that is ethnically, racially based, had vehemently opposed it, and they had even come to the Oval Office. He had actually invited them to the Oval Office when, in the 10 days that a president has in order to sign the bill. And he said to them, "This is your last chance. Convince me I should not sign this bill." And he did not accept their reasons, and he signed the bill. And what it said was that it would be considered a civil rights violation of the child if, after 30 days of attempting to find a same race, same ethnicity, same religious background and so on, home for a child available for adoption, that the social service agency with authority must seek out among all races, religions, ethnicities, national origins, equally to find a family for the child. That was the Adoption Reform Act. It also clarified some issue about the authority of tribal courts over mixed-race children. Another story. So, that had opened the door for my being able, potentially, to adopt a child that no one else wanted for adoption. I mean, you know, there were people that were quite willing to get paid in foster care, but not a permanent adoption. As an aside, I pursued that as much as I could, but in the meantime, I took in another child who was a close relative and cared for that child from the age of 3 to 10, and that made the house too full without major expansion to add yet another child by the mathematics of the home study, and so that's the way it worked out. So I never did do the adoption. I dropped it when I couldn't pass the home study, not out of any issue other than my house was too small. Not this one, another house that was in Maryland, similar to this one. So they had formed, as I said, Adoptions Together had formed a sister organization called Building Better Black Adoptive Families. Now, the first goal was to find black families to adopt these black babies that were available in such great quantity and needed homes. But failing that was to teach white families how to deal with the cultural issues of having a black adopted child in their family. And there were quite a few of them in Carroll County. It became quite interesting. The one solid Republican county in Maryland, Carroll County, had the highest rate of adoption of black children. The party of Lincoln adopts black children, gives them a home when no one else will. Okay, so, but they had Building Better Black Adoptive Families, and they scheduled an event, and I was going to this seminar put on by Building Better Black Adoptive Families. I believe it was December of '95. It could have been as late as January or February. I'm pretty sure it was December. I know that it was only X number of weeks after the Million Man March, which is relevant to this story. But it was at Howard University. It was on a Saturday. It was either at the sociology department or the social work department building. I don't remember now which. It's been many years now. It was, 25 years ago. Quarter of a century. So I went there. I got there very early because I had no idea what I was going to do about parking. And I ended up being able to park on the street quite close, but I had no clue what I would have to do or how long it would take to find the place or whatever. So I did that. And I was there. And as I said, he came in, and on the blackboard he wrote Barack Obama. He might have written Barack Hussein Obama, but I think he just wrote Barack Obama. Anyhow, he was just a young lawyer from Chicago then. But people came in and there was some talking. He looked at me a little curiously. I found out later why. I'm white. You see, he didn't expect what he thought, what was there. They didn't expect who he was. He'd been recommended to them by someone. I don't know who, but I suspect that I know who, and she's very famous. She's part of this story. You can figure that out. I'm not going to speculate because I could be totally wrong. Maybe that's not how they found out about him as a potential speaker. But anyhow, it got delayed, and he's just sitting over by the window, staring out the window, obviously quite troubled. So finally the organizers come in and tap the microphone. And this is a small room. This is a small classroom. And by the time everybody that was planning to be there was there, it was less than 20 people. I guess it was more than a dozen, but it was less than 20 people. And it was scheduled that we would have this speaker, one keynote speaker, a few minor speakers, and almost everybody in the room was one of the minor speakers and their spouse. And then we would have lunch that was being served by some volunteers, local church there, involved with Howard University. Wonderful ladies. And then in the afternoon they would have a practicum. In that particular case, the practicum was how to braid cornrows in children's hair. Not something that people who grew up with my growing up would have learned how to do. So it was very reasonable practicum for a number of reasons. I didn't stay for the practicum, though. I intended to. So anyhow, he's staring out the window. The people come in and tap on the, they've consulted with him, and they tap on the microphone and say, there's going to be some delay. And there's after another 20 or 40 minutes of delay, they say, okay, we've decided to go ahead. Turns out there was a misunderstanding about the nature of this meeting. And so the speaker has decided that it is not appropriate to give the speech he had prepared. This young lawyer from Chicago, Barack Obama. So we have decided that since the time is there, we got all you here, we have this time allocated for him to speak, we have nobody else to fill the place, that we will let him, we've agreed to let him speak whatever he chooses to speak on for this amount of time, and then you can ask questions, and that will be relevant to the purpose of this gathering. Okay. That is, the question session would be. So we proceeded. And he got up and said, my name is Barack Hussein Obama. And just 8 weeks ago, now he might have said 10 weeks ago, he might have said 7 weeks ago, just for sake of, I can't remember right, I'll say 8. But it was not 13 or 17, I don't think. It was not 17. It was a small number. Just X weeks ago, I had the great honor of spending 8 hours, I think it was 10 weeks, because 10 and 8, it wasn't the same, 8 hours continuously in the presence of a very great man, never more than 20 feet away from him. That great man, and I always forget whether his name is properly pronounced Louis or Louis, so forgive me if I'm getting it wrong every time. I'll say Louis. That great man is Louis Farrakhan. He spent the next few minutes describing exactly where he was on stage. Now, in this monologue, in this story of my evidence, my personal experience, I will sometimes go into analysis, because that's necessary to make the story make sense. But when I go into analysis, I'll make it clear this is analysis, not witness evidence. Okay? My analysis. There's been a lot of controversy about whether Barack Obama was present at the Million Man March or not, and whether he was on stage if he was present. Many have said no, he was not. Where he specifically described himself as standing, describing how many other men were there, where he was in the row, how many rows there were. When he described all of that to us, it made it quite clear that it would have been nearly impossible for a photographer standing on the ground or with a telephoto lens in a stand far away to get a picture that had a clear image of the face of Barack Obama standing in the third or fourth row of men standing there on stage. Other men's heads and shoulders would have concealed his face. So if you say, it couldn't have been, everybody knows photographic evidence has proved that he was not on that stage, he was way in the back row behind other men. That's what he told us. And he might have even been lower on his feet, in the sense that there may have been a riser, as it is called. And since he was not a speaker type that would be up on the riser, he may have been standing on a surface that was 8 inches lower, or 10 inches lower, or even 24 inches lower than the people who were officially on stage. Kind of back there with the, the microphone guys and the gaffers and the people that fix the sound if it gets goofy, But he was there. And I'll believe his testimony. I'm not going to call him a liar. I mean, what? I'm going to call Barack Obama a liar? Okay, give me a break. Not on a YouTube video, I'm not. All right. So, off of the analysis, back to his story. So he gets up there and he says, I had the honor to be on the stage. And he goes on and he talks about how that came to be. And the tenor of his whole discussion of what he wanted to talk about was this great honor he had of meeting certain people who were very important people, and he kept being very depreciating about lowly me, poor old me, little me, and these great people are taking notice of little me. I can't believe how fortunate I am that these great people are saying good things to me about me and being so helpful to me when they are so great and I am so small. That was his tenor. Some people might say, oh, analysis. Some people might say, oh, that's a put on. It's not how he really... I'm not going to say that. I completely believe his sincerity of his feelings that day. Back off analysis. What happened that day? 1995, December. By the way, the 95 I'm getting, because I looked up Wikipedia, okay, when was the Million Man March? I knew at the time that the Million Man March had only happened a few weeks ago. That's 25 years ago. I'm a 70-year-old man. I have to check my dates. I've never been good with numbers. Okay, back on the story. But it was a few weeks after the Million Man March. So here we are. And he says he was on stage at the Million Man March, and he talked about how great Farrakhan is. He went on like that for 5-10 minutes about just how great Farrakhan is. And he said, I was so stunned, he's now talking about all the way back, maybe the following spring, okay? I don't know how far back it was. He did not make the chronology clear until we got all the way up till about September. August maybe. I was just stunned, he says, when I was contacted by members of Louis Farrakhan's inner circle. some of his top lieutenants, and they wanted to talk to me, lowly me. Okay. And he had this talk, and I think he said, and then they wanted to introduce me to Louis Farrakhan himself. I don't remember for sure whether everything was handled through an intermediary or whether he actually, at this early stage, met Louis Farrakhan in person. But the upshot was they asked him to do a very special favor involving the Million Man March in the planning stages. Now, analysis. There has been controversy online that early reports of the Million Man March listed Barack Obama as a member of the steering committee putting it together, and then all those online references to him on that, in those lists, his name was omitted. All right, and what he told us that day makes that make sense. All right. Now, I'm not going to verify whether he really did have his name on Wikipedia in that list and somebody really did take his name off the list. I don't know. I have no dog in that fight. What I do know is what he told us that day, and I do know that what he told us that day makes those stories of his name was on and then his name disappeared make sense. It's one of these things where he said, but she said, he said, she said, and then you find out they're both telling the truth. And if you look at it from a distance, you can see that they're both telling the truth. All right, back to what happened that day. So I'm there, I'm listening to him, and he talks about they wanted him to do a very special favor. They needed him to contact certain people who might have objections to the Million Man March and negotiate with them so that any objection that they might have could be alleviated, so that there would be no disturbances on the day of the march itself. Now, he described the people, he listed some of the people he had and organizations he had to go to. He did not give us an exhaustive list of the people and organizations. He only gave us the high points, and that was the subject of his whole talk, was this pilgrimage he made to people and organizations in high places to precede the Million Man March. And here he was, and they asked him, they gave him this list. He said there was like 20 names and organizations on the list. I think that's what he said. It was about that size. He told us how many names and organizations. He might have said 30, but it wasn't 100, I don't think. But he had to make these contacts. And as he named these people and organizations, and really it was about organizations. And when he named the names, they were just simply the head of that organization. And as you get to the end, you'll find that some of the people added more names to the list. Oh, you need to talk to so-and-so, you know. What was not on the list was the other side of the aisle, so to speak. What was not on the list was the Ku Klux Klan, or the John Birch Society, or anybody like that. I don't think even anybody in the Republican Party was on that list. What was on the list was that the march was controversial. It had been announced, it was in the newspapers, it was rather controversial for years as it was in the planning and publicity stages. Some people were just plain opposed to it. They were the, as you might say, the usual suspects. Some people were in favor of it, and these were the people that were involved in the Great Society movement that came following the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which President Johnson, I won't get into the politics here of President Johnson and that act and why he did what he did and what he said about it. Point is, there was a political shift, not of the voters, but in Washington, and power alignments in Washington, and there was a group that was of Johnson's party that in general favored such people as Jesse Jackson, okay? And sometimes, though, people of that group, I'm now analyzing now, I'm sorry, I got off into analysis without saying so. Sometimes people in that group would say, you know, Jesse Jackson's going a bit too far. And that's not what they didn't want. They did not want somebody that was aligned with the Democratic Party, the Civil Rights Party, as it was seen in the newspapers and media in that era. Not getting into the issue today of whether that is a true description of that party. I'm simply saying that was the national media perception. And that's what's important. And so, the list was of organizations in that group who might potentially have said, we support civil rights, but this Farrakhan Million Man March is a bit too far. It's a bit of black nationalism. Well, you know, I mean, today we've got the controversy of another kind of blank line, won't say it, nationalism. All right? Controversy. So I'm actually back to the story now. That was the kind of list that he had. For example, one name on the list was to speak to the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Another was to speak to the chairman of the Democratic Senate Caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, and so on. Another one on the list was to speak to the president of B'nai B'rith, a Jewish organization, and to speak to the head of the Anti-Defamation League, a group that grew out of B'nai B'rith. This is the kind of people he was supposed to talk to. And now to the analysis I made right on the scene as he told the story of having been given this list, that he said he had no clue how he was going to reach all these people. They're not going to talk to me. But he took up the challenge, he said. Now, my analysis as I sat there, two words formed in my mind as he described this. Credible deniability. Louis Farrakhan can say, I never talked to the Jews at B'nai B'rith. None of my lieutenants here talked to the Jews at B'nai B'rith. And the president of B'nai B'rith could say, I never talked to Louis Farrakhan. I never talked to any of the officers of his organization. I never talked to anybody on the organizing committee of the Million Man March. What are you talking about here? You see? Credible deniability. Barack Obama did not use that word. That's what was in my mind as I sat there listening to it. Okay, so he went on and he told this story. And he said the first name that he decided to go to, the one that he'd give it a try, was, I think the position was the chairman of the Senate Democrat Caucus. But it was a man by the name of Joe Biden. And he went to Joe Biden, and he told him his mission. This is Barack Obama telling me personally, me and half a dozen couples that are in the room and some organizers, 20 people. As close as I am to the camera, I am with him in a chair. He's standing there without a podium. As close as I am to the camera, 6-8 feet away. So, as the old expression goes, his lips to my ear. He says, he explained with great trepidation his mission. Was there any problems that anybody expressed from the Senate Democrat Caucus? Was there anybody that might have some questions that needed to be answered? Joe says, you're just coming to me? There's other people you'd ought to come to. He says, well, I have a list. So Joe coaxes him to show him the list, and he looks at the list and he says, I can help you with this. shouldn't have a problem. I'll make sure that these people speak to you. B'nai B'rith. Yeah, I can see why this is Joe speaking as quoted by Barack Obama. I can see why you're concerned trying to get to talk to B'nai B'rith. They won't know who you are. I know the man. I'll give him a call. I'll set up the appointment for you. Okay? Sets up the appointment. Young lawyer from Chicago. The head of the biggest national Jewish organization. To talk about an event organized by the Nation of Islam. Awkward. So, with Joe Biden's help, over the months, Barack Obama, as he told us, visited all these people on his list and basically got them to say, okay, we will not organize a counter demonstration. We won't get on TV and say, this is a bad thing that they're doing. We won't have controversy about this, not from our side. So that any controversy that happens will come from others. We don't need to, usual suspects. Okay, that was his job, and he's telling us about it. And he says, but the really big thing that happened, he said, there's a man that you need to talk to in New York. He's been in both parties, he's important, he's a businessman, he's in politics. He's not on the list, but you need to talk to this man. He's a friend of mine, I will arrange it. So he arranges a certain day to go to a certain big hotel. It was not the Astoria, I think it was the Park Plaza, but I'm not sure, but I did check it. Because he told us the name of the hotel that he had to go to New York City. If it was not the Park Plaza, it was of that same stature. And go to a certain place where he would have lunch with Michael Bloomberg. Okay, so he goes. I was able to verify that meeting most likely happened by looking at an online resource of somebody's published schedule. Okay? So he tells us the story, Barack Obama telling us that he was sitting in the room, he got there, or he was told to get there early, got there early, he's way up in the hotel in a room that's been set up as a luncheon room, even though it's not on the floor with the restaurants, it's way up in the private rooms, but it's a big room and it's set up with tables for luncheon. And people start coming in black suits, wearing black glasses. The men in black start arriving. Okay. And he had to go through some security checks. Okay. Well, hey, big businessman. He's got his security thugs, whatever. That's the way Barack Obama told the story. So he was just, all right, he's got his security thugs. I don't know who they are. I didn't ask them to identify themselves. Black man, white security guys. I ain't going to make a fuss, So the men in black come in, and he's waiting for this Michael Bloomberg to walk in. And he did walk in eventually. But who walks through the door? Hillary Clinton, who at the time was First Lady of the United States. Now, I did check that part of the story. Now, he could have checked the same way I did and made it up. But I am not going to accuse Barack Obama of lying. Not going to do it. He could have got online the same place I got online and said, okay, here's a schedule and I can use this to corroborate the story. But what I did, after I got back to work on Monday, this was on a Saturday, I got back to work on Monday, I got online on my work computer at Allied Signal, and I looked up online resources, and I looked up a website that was just been formed not long before, whitehouse.gov. And they had a place for FLOTUS, First Lady of the United States. And they had her schedule. In the future, in the past, it was a calendar program up there. Everything she was doing that was publicly known. And she had been, that weekend that he had described and given the precise date, September, August, something like that, a month or two before the Million Man March, she had been in New York for a couple of days. I believe she was ribbon cutting at the opening of a new hospital. I believe that's what it was. That was the big public event that she, was there and spoke and cut the ribbon and all that. But on that particular day, which I think was a Tuesday midday, there on this calendar program at whitehouse.gov, it said, FLOTUS private luncheon, Park Plaza Hotel. Okay, like I said, he could have made his story up. I'm not going to accuse Barack Obama of lying. Could have used the same resource. But what I say is that I verified that this meeting did take place. And he says that the whole meeting was not really about him meeting Michael Bloomberg. He met him, shook hands, had a few words. It was about Hillary Clinton grilling him about himself, his future, his plans, and so on. Interesting. And she promised him that she would look into his career and his future and help him along his way in 1995, in the summer or early autumn. I was expecting more in the talk. That was kind of like, okay, nothing more to say. Except that he wrapped it up by saying, so that's my story. And I guess the bottom line, he says, is that I'm just so in awe and thrilled and dumbfounded that the great Joe Biden, that's his words, quote, the great Joe Biden, that the great Joe Biden would take interest in little me and promise to further my career. That's the timeline extension that I'm talking about. That is when the Biden-Obama timeline starts. I'm in analysis now. And so when Barack Obama got the nomination, everyone but me, everybody in the entire country except for me and Joe Biden, were surprised when he said, I want Joe Biden for my running mate. Now I'm going to go deeper in analysis. It is possible that the intention, not the execution, but the intention was that Barack Obama was Joe Biden's sock puppet. Joe Biden, who couldn't get elected, would have an electable person in the front. Okay. That's deep analysis. I could be totally wrong on that. Now, I didn't get into some other things that probably would have been distracting if I brought them up at the time. Why is this Hillary Clinton thing, how does that come about? Well, Joe Biden arranged it, but there's a deeper level. Remember I said that Barack Obama was at that meeting giving a speech, the Building Better Black Adoptive Families, because there was a mix-up. Well, you see, after the Million Man March, the one thing that is publicly known and not disputed is that a few weeks after the Million Man March, Louis Farrakhan created a new organization. It only ever existed really on paper. It never went anywhere. But in the first few weeks after it was formed, it looked like it was going to be a thing, a lobbying organization. And it had a name very similar to Building Better Black Adoptive Families. It was something like the Black Adoption Council of America or something like that, okay? Very similar names, you see. And he named a young lawyer from Chicago, Barack Hussein Obama II, to be its executive director. So that was the position that he held. And the purpose of this organization, founded by Louis Farrakhan, called something like Black Adoptive Council of America, was to fight against the adoption of black children into white families. Against. So here's the executive director of that organization with a fiery speech in his attaché case about how terrible black children being adopted in white families was, and he's in an organization whose whole purpose her primary purpose, her biggest purpose, is to prepare white families to adopt black babies. It was awkward. Now, there's another little piece. At this point, when that meeting is scheduled in December of 1995, a few weeks after the Million Man March, this is many weeks, several months after Barack Obama, we're in a deep analysis, after Barack Obama has met with Hillary Clinton for the first time, that organization, that winter, the parent organization, Adoptions Together, held a fundraiser, black tie fundraiser, $500 a plate, unless you wanted to sit up front, in which case it was $1,000 a plate. If you wanted to sit at the head table, it was $2,500 a plate. If you wanted to get to have canapes or cocktails ahead of time with the keynote speaker, it was like $10,000 a plate. And the keynote speaker was Hillary Clinton, First Lady Hillary Clinton. So she was connected to the organization. Some people said it was one of her favorite charities. Okay. So she was, in fact, in a position where she could have set up for him to be in a untenable position to give that speech. Well, why would she do that? To find out if he had what it takes to stand up in a presidential debate. That's why. Can he handle the surprise questions? Okay, back to the story. So he finished that story, and then it was question time. So we asked him a bunch of questions. Basically, why are you here? Why are you picked? And the reason he was picked is because, as you know, he was a black man who grew up, most of his life, he grew up in the care of his white Jewish grandparents in Hawaii. Now, many of you are going to say, what? Because he told us about then, we asked, well, tell us the story of your life. And he told us then the story of his life. And how he had grown up overseas, how he'd spent many of his formative years, well actually, a certain amount of his formative years going to a madrasa in Indonesia. And you're going to say, did he say where he was born? It is my recollection that he said he was born in Kenya. But I'm not going to swear on that one. It wasn't important to me at the time. I didn't register it deeply. But I think he said he was born in Kenya. And by the way, the book that was published in his name that he autographed so many copies of says he was born in Kenya. It's supposed to be his autobiography. Okay? Did he say it at that time? I think he did, but I'm not going to swear to that. The rest of this I would swear to. That was just unimportant at the time. What was important was that he talked about being adopted effectively by his grandparents. We asked him how he felt about it, and he said, "That was the worst thing that ever happened to me!" He screamed. Very emotional. We said, somebody asked, well, would you have rather been in the foster care system? I would give anything to change the past and have been in a black foster family in the foster care system than to be with those white people I had to grow up with. And there were a bunch of other things that he said. Now, I've been around rednecks a lot of my life. I have met some very, very racist people. And I've been in Africa. And you say, well, what's that have to do with racism? You would not believe how color racist they can be in Africa. Skin tones can make a huge difference. Racism can run very deep. There they call it tribalism. It's no different than racism. And India the same way. There they call it caste. It's racism. It goes both ways sometimes. But I've never met any other person who showed more racism than that man on that day. absolute, vehemently hated and despised the white half of himself. It was very clear. Okay. That was the story. But him and the great Joe Biden, 95. So anything that is squirrely about Joe Biden, that's in the news a lot today. Maybe there was a connection to Obama as well, that far back. And now I've told my story. It is all true.